Before we start, I want you to picture one thing: a red and white can sitting on a grocery shelf. It looks harmless. It looks ordinary. But inside that label is a story so extreme it sounds like fiction. Here's the shock. A chemist named John Thompson Dorrance became one of the richest men in America by doing one brutal little thing to soup. He removed the water. He turned Campbell into a machine that printed money. Then John Thompson Dorrance died in 1930. And after he died, Pennsylvania and New Jersey both went to war in court to claim him at the same time. Not because they loved him, because they wanted to tax his death. Twice. And they won. Both of them. The combined bill was more than $26 million in the 1930s, tied to the estate fight that reached the era of Supreme Court attention and legal precedent. Now imagine you are his family. His wife, Ethel Dorrance. His children, including his only son, John Jr., the boy everyone called Jack. You are born into a fortune you did not earn, but it does not feel like a gift. It feels like a set of handcuffs. Because the will that created your wealth also tried to control it. It warned the family not to sell Campbell shares unless they sold them as one block. The money is yours, but the rules are not. This is not a story about soup. This is a story about what John Thompson Dorrance built and what his last decisions did to everyone who carried his name. Chapter 1. The $7.50 Chemist. Picture a cramped lab in Camden, glassware, steam, and a young chemist chasing an idea that feels too simple to matter. In 1869, a fruit merchant named Joseph Campbell and an icebox manufacturer named Abraham Anderson opened a small canning operation in Camden, New Jersey. They packed tomatoes, vegetables, jellies, and minced meat. It was a modest business. Anderson left within a few years. Campbell carried on. In 1894, after nearly 3 decades, Campbell retired. A man named Arthur Dorrance had risen to the presidency of the company. Under Arthur, the operation was stable and profitable enough. They canned beefsteak tomatoes and sold them regionally. In 1895, the company introduced its first ready-to-eat soup. It sold reasonably well. Nothing about this business suggested it was about to become a national icon. Then Arthur's nephew showed up. His name was John Thompson Dorrance. He was born on November 11th, 1873, in Bristol, Pennsylvania. He came from a family with means. But what made him dangerous was not money. It was restlessness. He was sharp, impatient, and obsessed with chemistry. He earned a Bachelor of Science from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in 1895. Then he sailed to Germany to pursue a doctorate at the University of Göttingen. While he was abroad, he spent time in Paris. He ate in restaurants. He studied soups the way a serious person studies a language. He noticed something simple that most people ignore. Europeans treated soup like a daily essential. Americans did not. And he believed the reason was not taste. It was practicality. In the United States, prepared soups were expensive, heavy, and sold in oversized cans. If someone fixed those problems, the market would explode. He completed his doctorate in 1897. After that, he received teaching offers from multiple universities. He declined them. Instead, he went to Camden and asked his uncle for a job at the factory. Arthur was skeptical. His nephew looked like a scholar, not a man built for canning fruits and vegetables. But John was persistent. He offered to work for $7.50 per week, and he offered to equip his own laboratory out of pocket. Arthur finally gave in. It turned out to be one of the most consequential hiring decisions in American food history. John built a small lab inside the Camden plant and got to work. His thinking was elegant. At the time, canned soup was sold in large containers, and most of it was water. A single can weighed several pounds. It cost a housewife more than 30 cents. That water made it expensive to can, expensive to ship, and expensive to stock on shelves. So John decided to remove the water. He cooked soup down to a concentrated form. He preserved the same flavor and nutrition in a can roughly 1/3 the size. The customer would add water at home. That single move changed everything. Production got cheaper. Freight got cheaper. Storage got cheaper. A can that once cost more than 30 cents could now sell for 10 cents. He developed the formula in 1897. Within 2 years, the first cans of condensed soup were on store shelves. The original variety was tomato. It sold immediately. And this is the part people forget. John was a chemist. But he also understood psychology. In 1898, a company executive named Herberton Williams attended the annual Cornell versus Penn football game. He came back captivated by the vivid red and white uniforms. He persuaded the company to abandon its existing black and orange label and adopt that same red and white color pairing. It was a change born from a Saturday afternoon football game, and it produced a brand identity that would last for more than a century. 2 years later, in 1900, the company entered a soup competition at the Paris International Exposition. They did not bring a chef. They packed cans of condensed soup in their luggage, prepared them on site, and won a bronze medal for product excellence. John had that medal printed onto the label. It stayed there for more than 125 years. In 1904, a Philadelphia artist named Grace Drayton sketched a pair of rosy-cheeked children for a series of streetcar advertisements. The Campbell kids became an advertising fixture. The illustrations gave the brand a personality that no label alone could create. By the early 1900s, the company offered 21 varieties, each priced at a dime. And while the nation saw a cheap can of comfort, John saw something else. He saw ownership. Inside the company, the understanding was plain. John knew the recipes. He engineered the process. If the other shareholders refused his offers, he could walk out, create a rival operation, and ruin them. Whether that threat was spoken aloud is unclear, but the result was not. Share by share, year after year, he bought his way toward total control. When Arthur retired in 1914, John succeeded him as president. The following year, 1915, he purchased the remaining interest held by the Campbell family and became the sole proprietor. The man who arrived at $7.50 per week now controlled an enterprise redefining the American kitchen. He was 42 years old, and he was only getting started. And that tiny lab decision was about to turn into something far louder. A national obsession with a red and white label. Chapter 2. Red, white, and 10 cents. Now picture the aisle. Thousands of identical cans, a price any family can afford, and a brand that starts to feel like a habit. John had one obsession: focus. He wanted Campbell to make soup and make it better than anyone else, and make sure every household in America knew the name. He cut away anything that distracted from that goal. Jams, condiments, and pickled goods were phased out. He believed a company trying to do too many things would do none of them well. In 1906, he married Ethel Mallinrot in Baltimore. She came from a prominent Maryland family. Together they had 5 children, 4 daughters, Eleanor, Ethel, Charlotte, and Margaret, and 1 son, John Jr., born in 1919. The marriage placed John in the social world of the Eastern establishment, but John was not built for leisure. He was at the factory before dawn. He involved himself in every detail, from the varieties of tomatoes grown on company research farms to the wording of an advertisement. In 1911, Campbell Soups reached California for the first time. Distributing a perishable product across thousands of miles of rail lines and warehouses was a genuine logistical achievement in the early 20th century. Campbell became one of the first food companies to serve the entire nation. In 1912, John launched an agricultural program, putting the company in the business of growing its own tomatoes. He wanted to control quality from seed to shelf. During the 8 summer weeks of harvest, the entire plant was devoted to processing tomatoes into soup and juice. Nothing else was produced until the crop was in. In 1915, he acquired the Franco-American Food Company, a New Jersey producer of canned pasta and soups that had been in operation since 1886. Franco-American had been the first company in America to manufacture canned soup commercially. John did not buy it to preserve its soup line. He bought it to absorb a competitor and take its distribution network. The Franco-American name was gradually retired from soup products and reassigned to pasta. In 1922, the company was reincorporated under a new name. It had been the Joseph Campbell Company. Now it was the Campbell Soup Company. Putting the word soup directly into the corporate identity was a declaration. This was not a general-purpose canning operation. By the late 1920s, Campbell was selling more soup than any company in the world. The model stayed simple: one formula, one can, a price nearly anyone could afford. John sat on boards of banks and railroads. He held memberships in scientific societies on both sides of the Atlantic. He received the French Legion of Honor. By any measure, he was among the wealthiest men in the United States. And he was about to make the single most expensive mistake of his life. But the bigger the machine became, the harder it was for one family to pretend it had no cost. Chapter 3. Woodcrest, the house that existed for a lie. See the mansion on the hill, grand on the outside, but built on paperwork that would one day come back to collect. By 1925, John was generating more wealth than he could spend. His company sold soup in every state in the Union. The fortune kept growing, so he decided to buy a house that matched it. The property was called Woodcrest. It sat on 238 acres on the Philadelphia Main Line, surrounded by estates of bankers, railroad magnates, and old money families. The house was a 51-room mansion with servants' quarters, stables, outbuildings, and a garage built for 7 automobiles. 16 servants staffed the house. 10 to 12 more worked the grounds. On November 14, 1925, the Dorrance family moved in. Every piece of personal property was transported from their previous home in Cinnaminson, New Jersey. The children enrolled in local schools. Their friendships and daily existence shifted to Pennsylvania. This was not a country retreat. This was a relocation. Ethel entertained frequently and lavishly. She hosted teas and garden parties that drew admiring coverage in society pages. The family had arrived on the main line, and they intended to stay, but not officially. John understood something about money that many of his neighbors did not. New Jersey, where the factory sat and where the family had lived since 1911, taxed inherited wealth at a far lower rate than Pennsylvania. If John died as a Pennsylvania resident, his family would owe the Commonwealth an enormous sum on a fortune already exceeding $100 million. So he kept Cinnaminson alive. The old house in New Jersey was plain. Even his wife later described it under oath as ordinary and very ugly. But John maintained the fiction that it was still his home. He kept voter registration in New Jersey. His driver's license was issued there. He banked there. His lawyers practiced there. His will declared him a resident of Cinnaminson Township, Burlington County, and required his executives, under penalty, to file it for probate in that state. The deception was meticulous, but the numbers told a different story. Before the move, he employed 10 servants at Cinnaminson. Afterward, the number dropped to 4. After his mother and sister both died there in the late 1920s, the staff fell to 2. Household spending at the New Jersey property collapsed. The monthly gas and electric bill came to about $7. John visited occasionally. The property adjoined the company Experimental Tomato Farms, so he had practical reasons to stop by. But the central fact remained. From November 1925 until the day he died, the Dorrance family lived at Woodcrest. Everything else was performance. In the evenings, John sat in a mansion built for a financier. He ran a company that made him wealthier every quarter. And he drank. Multiple accounts suggest he drank heavily. He refused every approach from investment bankers who wanted to take the company public. He wanted no outside ownership. He wanted no scrutiny. He was willing to maintain a $7 electricity bill in a house he barely visited to protect a fortune that would outlast him by a century. He was 56 years old. He had written a will that ran to 35 pages, and the scheme he built so carefully was about to collapse. The house looked like permanence. The problem was that the state could read past the wallpaper. Chapter 4. Death and the Double Tax. Now shift to courtrooms and tax offices, where the fight is not about grief, but about where a man truly lived. John Thompson Dorrance died on September 21, 1930, of heart disease. He was 56 years old. He did not die at Woodcrest. He died at Cinnaminson. The family had spent part of that summer at Bar Harbor, Maine, where they kept a third residence. When they returned in early fall, Woodcrest was being prepared for the season. So John stopped at the old New Jersey house, the one he had spent years pretending was still his home. And that is where his heart gave out. His executives did exactly what his will instructed. They filed the will for probate in Burlington County, New Jersey, identifying the deceased as a resident of Cinnaminson Township. His brother Arthur succeeded him as president of the Campbell Soup Company. The body was taken across the state line and buried at West Laurel Hill Cemetery in Ballacynwood, Pennsylvania. And then the letters arrived. Pennsylvania moved first. The Commonwealth claimed John had been domiciled in Pennsylvania from the moment the family moved into Woodcrest in 1925. It appointed an appraiser who valued the estate at just under $200 million and assessed an inheritance tax of $31,465,000. The executives fought it. They appealed to the Orphans Court of Delaware County, which sided with them and threw out the assessment. Pennsylvania took the case to the state Supreme Court. In September of 1932, that court reversed the lower ruling. John, it held, had been domiciled in Pennsylvania. The evidence was overwhelming. The 51 rooms, the 16 servants, the children in local schools, the social life conducted entirely from Pennsylvania. His declarations, his voter registration, his driver's license, none of it mattered. A man's conduct, the court ruled, speaks louder than paperwork. The executives asked the United States Supreme Court to intervene. It declined. They paid Pennsylvania more than $14 million, including interest, plus a $4 million bond against additional amounts that might come due. Then New Jersey made its claim. New Jersey had its own evidence. John had voted there, banked there, run his company from Camden, and insisted in his own will that he was a citizen of New Jersey. The tax commissioner assessed an inheritance tax of $12,247,000 on an estate valued at over $115 million. The executives argued the Pennsylvania Supreme Court had already settled the question. You cannot tax a man twice for the privilege of dying. New Jersey disagreed. Its prerogative court upheld the assessment in 1934. Its Supreme Court affirmed in early 1935. Both courts held the Pennsylvania ruling was not binding. Each state had the right to determine domicile for itself, and New Jersey determined that John belonged to them. The executives went back to the United States Supreme Court. In December of 1935, Justice Louis Brandeis delivered the opinion. The court would not intervene. The federal judiciary had no authority to enjoin a state tax proceeding already working its way through state courts. So John Thompson Dorrance, who spent the last 5 years of his life maintaining a legal fiction to protect his fortune, ended up domiciled in 2 states simultaneously. Pennsylvania collected over $14 million. New Jersey collected over $12 million. The combined bill came to more than $26 million. Had he simply chosen one state and declared it honestly, the figure would have been roughly half. The case became a landmark in American tax law, studied and cited for decades. He built a fortune by removing what was unnecessary: water from soup, distractions from a product line, partners from a company. But in the matter of his own death, he added something that did not need to be there. A second home maintained for no purpose other than deception. And it doubled the bill. He left behind a will, and what it contained would bind the Dorrance family and the Campbell Soup Company for the rest of the 20th century. After the double tax, the next fight wasn't in court. It was inside the family on paper, in a will. Chapter 5. The 35-page will. Imagine a document thick enough to be a weapon. 35 pages that try to control the future from the grave. The will was read in Mount Holly, New Jersey. The heirs learned John had divided his fortune into 6 parts. His wife Ethel received 1/4. His only son, John Jr., known as Jack, received 1/4, along with his father's personal library and a grandfather clock. The 4 daughters, Eleanor, Ethel, Charlotte, and Margaret, each received 1/8. Even 1/8 of the Dorrance estate was a sum most men would never see in a lifetime. At the time the will was filed, the total fortune was estimated at $150 million. But the money was not the point. The stock was. John spent his life refusing every offer to sell or dilute his ownership of the Campbell Soup Company. In death, he intended to continue that refusal. The will instructed his executives, in the strongest possible language, not to sell the company shares. If a sale were ever necessary, it could only come after what he called the greatest deliberation, and every share was to be sold in a single block. No slow liquidation, no outsiders gaining a foothold, one transaction at a time. The structure went deeper. When each of John's children eventually died, the stock would not simply pass to their spouses or be absorbed into other estates. It would flow to their children, and Jack's heirs, as a group, would receive double the allotment given to the heirs of each daughter. The will guaranteed the male line, the one carrying the Dorrance name, would always hold the largest share. There was another calculation behind the New Jersey residency fiction. Under Pennsylvania law, a widow was entitled to 1/3 of her husband's personal property, regardless of what a will said. New Jersey had no such provision. By maintaining the fiction of Cinnamon, John ensured Ethel would receive exactly what he chose to give her, and not a dollar more. He even asked her to sign a statement before his death, confirming their legal residence was New Jersey. This is the emotional center of the whole story. The will was not a gesture of generosity. It was an instrument of control. It told the family what to own, how to own it, and what would happen if they disobeyed. It created a structure that would hold for decades, binding children still in school and grandchildren not yet born. Jack Dorrance was 11 years old. A newspaper called him the nearest thing to a reigning earl or duke that America had. He inherited a quarter of the largest privately held food company in America, and he inherited a set of instructions that would govern the rest of his life. The ink was dry. Now the living had to decide whether to obey it or pay for disobeying it. Chapter 6. The Prince and the Prisoner. Inside the fortune, a son grows up as both heir and prisoner, protected by money, boxed in by it. Jack grew up knowing exactly what he was. At Princeton, he drove a car fitted with tear gas jets, a precaution against kidnapping. Decades later, as chairman of Campbell, he traveled a different route to the office every day, trailed by bodyguards. He came to Princeton from St. George's School in Newport, Rhode Island. He majored in geology and graduated in the class of 1941. He enlisted in the Signal Corps, served in China, and rose from private to captain. After the war, he reported to the factory floor in Camden. His father had not intended for him to run the company. The will gave him ownership, not authority. John had seen too many heirs fail in the executive chair. So Campbell was led first by Jack's uncle Arthur, and then by a series of non-family executives. Jack spent more than a decade working through the ranks. He served as a floor foreman, an assistant treasurer, and an aide to the president. In 1962, he was named chairman of the board. He held the position for 22 years. During that time, Campbell sold stock to the public for the first time in 1954. It expanded into frozen foods, restaurants, and international markets. But Jack did not see himself as a builder. He saw himself as a guardian. One friend put it simply. Jack felt conscious that his father made the money, and he had not. He did not find great joy in being rich. He found it as embarrassing as it was fun. Jack married twice. His first marriage ended in divorce in 1963. He remarried and settled on the main line. He had 3 children, a son named John Thompson Dorrance III, known since childhood by a nickname that became IPY, and 2 younger children, Mary Alice and Bennett. All 3 attended the University of Arizona. Their photographs were absent from their yearbooks. That detail alone tells you what kind of family this was. Private, controlled, a dynasty that did not want to be seen. Jack drank, carrying forward a pattern his father had set. He told his children almost nothing about the company or the fortune that awaited them. In 1984, he surprised shareholders at the annual meeting by announcing, in a single offhand sentence, that he would step down as chairman. He remained on the board and stayed active at headquarters. 5 years later, on April 9, 1989, he died of a heart attack at his home. He was 70 years old. His 3 children went from receiving quarterly trust distributions to holding direct ownership of roughly 1/3 of the Campbell Soup Company. The fortune their grandfather locked inside a 35-page will now belong to them. Jack inherited control. What he didn't inherit was peace. Chapter 7. Project Toad and the Family That Could Not Agree. The family has the power to act together. The problem is, they rarely do. Jack tried in his final years to prepare the next generation. In March of 1989, he gathered his children, nieces, and nephews at the Greenbrier Hotel in West Virginia for a 3-day retreat. Part family reunion, part business seminar. The heirs toured operations, asked questions, and mingled with executives. Jack watched from a distance and felt cautiously hopeful. He was dead less than 2 weeks later. Now 9 cousins controlled a majority of the company, but they were not a unified family. They were 3 branches with separate grievances. Jack's children, John III, Mary Alice, and Bennett, held the largest combined stake. Older cousins from another branch held a smaller but significant share. A third group sat somewhere in between. Much of the family wealth was locked in Campbell stock, inherited free of tax. But the stock was also a trap. Earnings had been flat for years, under a chief executive whose expansion strategy produced little return. The cousins who wanted to sell faced a practical reality. If enough of them dumped shares on the open market, the price would collapse. The only way to extract full value was to sell the company itself. Within months of Jack's death, a secret merger plan emerged. It was called Project Toad. It began casually on a ski trip in Vail, when a family member mentioned to a neighbor that Campbell needed a new chief executive. The neighbor suggested the head of Quaker Oats. From that chance conversation came a proposal that would have merged Campbell with Quaker Oats to create the second largest food company in America behind only Philip Morris. It would have moved headquarters to Chicago, and it would have reduced the Dorrance family from majority owners to minority shareholders. When Bennett and their cousin George Strawbridge learned what was being negotiated without their consent, they placed a conference call to the chairman and killed it. Toad was dead, but the rift was not. Three dissident families holding about 17% of the stock filed papers with the Securities and Exchange Commission, signaling their intent to sell. They hired a high-profile Manhattan lawyer and sent him to Campbell headquarters with a message: "Find a way to satisfy everyone, or we force a sale." Jack's three children held firm. They controlled enough stock to block any transaction. But blocking a sale was not the same as fixing a company. Campbell needed new direction. The family needed someone outside the bloodline to provide it. In late 1989, the board recruited David W. Johnson, an executive who had previously turned around Gerber Products. He restructured operations, closed underperforming businesses, and within 2 years improved earnings enough to quiet the dissidents. By January of 1990, the immediate crisis had passed. The dissidents never truly changed their minds, but for the moment, the center held. John III, Mary Alice, and Bennett had done what their grandfather's will demanded. They refused to sell. And here is where the story pivots. Because the eldest of the three, the one who fought hardest to keep the company in the family, was about to make a decision that had nothing to do with soup, and everything to do with the fortune behind it. When unity failed, each branch searched for its own escape route. Chapter 8. The Rancher. Far from boardrooms, one descendant finds a different kind of control: land, animals, and a life with fewer rules. John Thompson Dorrance III was not raised to be a businessman. His parents divorced when he was 19, and his mother took him to Switzerland. He returned to the United States for college, enrolled at the University of Arizona, earned a business degree, and then did something no Dorrance had done before. He disappeared. He bought a ranch near Devil's Tower in eastern Wyoming, 18,000 acres of open grassland, far from Camden, far from the main line, far from the family name. He raised Brangus cattle under the brand IPY, a shortened version of his childhood nickname. As a small boy, he tried to pronounce the Roman numeral after his name. The sound stuck. For 15 years, he lived as a rancher. He married a woman named Gundel and had 2 sons. His home was a 3-story chalet filled with mounted game. He was comfortable, but not wealthy in a way the Dorrance name would suggest. His father's trust provided a quarterly stipend of $100,000, generous by ordinary standards, but tiny compared to the fortune locked in Campbell stock waiting for Jack to die. When his father's heart stopped in 1989, everything changed. His share of the company was suddenly worth hundreds of millions. His income jumped to $87,000 a day in dividends alone. He joined the Campbell board and surprised everyone. He was intense, unpredictable, deeply engaged. He flew at his own expense to inspect operations in Hong Kong, Spain, and Argentina. One director described it simply: for him, it was a mission. He fought to keep the company in the family. He helped kill Project Toad, and now he stared at a tax code that would, upon his death, take more than half of everything he just inherited. But leaving the boardroom doesn't mean leaving the story. Chapter 9. The Irish Passport. In a quiet office, a passport application becomes a rebellion. One signature that breaks a century-long expectation. The math was straightforward. Under American law, at the time, when he died, his estate would owe the federal government 55% of its value in estate taxes. On a fortune measured in hundreds of millions, that meant his children would lose more than half their inheritance. His grandfather tried to game the system by maintaining a fake address in New Jersey. It backfired spectacularly and cost the family tens of millions. So the grandson chose a different approach. He decided to leave the country. In the early 1990s, he invested $1.5 million to plant trees on roughly 1,000 acres of land in Ireland. Under Irish law at the time, foreign nationals who made qualifying investments could apply for citizenship. He met the requirements. In 1995, he appeared before an Irish judge, swore fidelity, and became a citizen of the Republic of Ireland. Then he walked into the United States Embassy in Dublin and signed a 1-page document renouncing his American nationality. Think about that moment. A single page, a signature, and one of the most powerful passports on earth is gone. Not stolen, Not revoked. Chosen. The consequences were immediate and deliberate. In Ireland, the estate tax rate was 2%. He could still visit his Wyoming ranch, which he transferred to his sons 2 years earlier. He could still attend board meetings in Camden, but he could not spend more than 120 days a year on American soil without risking taxation as a resident. In November of 1996, he sold his Campbell shares. The transaction was worth $720 million. He settled into a Georgian townhouse in Dublin, spent winters at a private estate in the Bahamas, and largely vanished from public life. Washington reacted with fury. A member of Congress attacked him from the floor of the House. President Bill Clinton proposed an exit tax aimed at wealthy Americans who renounced citizenship to avoid estate taxes. John became the most prominent example of a new kind of American immigrant, not someone fleeing persecution or poverty, someone fleeing the tax code. The irony was impossible to miss. 65 years earlier, his grandfather maintained a house he never lived in to avoid estate inheritance tax. It doubled the bill. Now the grandson abandoned an entire country for the same reason. The instinct was identical. Only the scale changed. One exit was legal. Another would be cultural and public. Chapter 10. The Horsewoman. In stables and arenas, another heir builds status without soup yet still carries the family vote like a badge. While John III prepared to leave the country, his sister did the opposite. Mary Alice Dorrance Malone stayed in Pennsylvania, stayed on the board, and stayed in the saddle. She was born on February 3rd, 1950. She grew up in Chester County among rolling farmland and old money. As a girl, she joined a local pony club and bonded with horses in a way that never loosened. By her 20s, she ran a boarding and training facility in Arizona. She coached young riders and founded local clubs. In 1976, she returned to Pennsylvania and founded Iron Spring Farm in Coatesville. European warm bloods were still largely unknown in the United States. American breeders had little access to bloodlines that dominated international dressage. Mary Alice began importing Dutch warm blood stallions from the Netherlands. Over decades, she brought influential sport horse sires to American soil. The program expanded. The horses she bred and imported competed at the highest levels. She was not only a breeder, she competed. She built a reputation in equestrian sport that stood on its own, separate from soup. In 1990, 1 year after her father died, she was elected to the Campbell Board of Directors. She served longer than any other director in the company history. Her stake was about 18%, making her the single largest individual shareholder. Forbes valued her fortune at $4.1 billion. She was intensely private. She gave almost no interviews. When a former cook and traveling companion attempted to extort her in 2009, threatening to publish a tell-all book unless she paid $1 million, she went straight to authorities. The FBI investigated. The person was arrested in August 2010 and later pleaded guilty. Mary Alice said nothing publicly. No statements. No interviews. Silence that felt like armor. She had 2 daughters. She raised them in the same countryside she grew up in. Mary Alice Dorrance Malone died peacefully at home on June 16, 2025. She was 75 years old. Within weeks, her eldest daughter was appointed to fill her seat on the board. The transition was seamless. The seat passed the way a title passes in an old European house. Not because it was owed, because someone had to hold it. Behind the trophies, the question stayed the same. Who would hold the family together when agreements ran out? Chapter 11. The default leader. When everyone pulls in different directions, someone has to become the hinge that keeps the whole thing from snapping. Bennett Dorrance was the youngest of Jack's 3 children and in many ways the least visible. He did not breed Olympic horses. He did not renounce citizenship. After college, he moved to Arizona and stayed there. In the early 1980s, he co-founded DMB Associates, a real estate development firm based in Scottsdale. The company built master-planned residential communities and commercial properties across Arizona, California, and Utah. It was successful, respected, and entirely unrelated to soup. Bennett had no interest in running Campbell, but he understood something his relatives did not want to admit. Someone in the family had to keep the coalition together. He joined the Campbell board in 1989, the same year his father died. He was in his early 30s. The company was in crisis. Cousins threatened to sell. A secret merger had just been killed. The family voting trust was dissolving. Bennett stepped into chaos not as a corporate strategist, but as a mediator. He held about 15% of the company and used it like leverage a diplomat uses. Quietly, consistently, without drawing attention. At a family business conference in the mid-1990s, Bennett described his role in terms no one would envy. He called himself the default leader of the Dorrance family. No one else could do it, he said, and no one else wanted to do it. The title was not flattering. It was accurate. John III left the country. Mary Alice focused on horses and board duty. Cousins from other branches scattered, some disengaged, some hostile. Bennett made the phone calls, arranged the meetings, worked to keep the family stake voting as a bloc rather than fragmenting into a dozen competing interests. He lived in Paradise Valley near Phoenix. Comfortable, but deliberately low profile. When Forbes estimated his net worth at roughly $3.3 billion, he offered no comment. He served on the Campbell board from 1989 to 2022. In 2022, he stepped down and handed the seat to his son, Bennett Dorrance Jr. The pattern was forming, board seats moving from parent to child, a quiet mechanism that kept family influence alive. And then, the outside world did what it always does to icons. It turned the can into a myth. Chapter 12. Warhol paints the can. Then pop culture steps in. The can becomes art, and the family business becomes a symbol owned by the whole world. In the summer of 1962, a 33-year-old commercial illustrator named Andy Warhol exhibited 32 small canvases at the Ferris Gallery in Los Angeles. Each painting depicted a single can of Campbell condensed soup, one for every variety the company sold. They were displayed on a narrow wooden shelf, like products on a supermarket aisle. Critics mocked the idea that a soup can belong in a gallery. Sales were poor. The gallery co-owner, Irving Blum, ultimately decided to keep the entire set. He paid $1,000 for all 32 paintings. 34 years later, he sold them to the Museum of Modern Art in New York for $15 million. Warhol did not choose Campbell at random. He said he used to have the same lunch every day for 20 years. The red and white can was the most familiar object in his kitchen. Familiarity was the point. By painting it with the precision of a commercial draftsman and hanging it in a fine art gallery, he forced a question. Where does commerce end and culture begin? Is a soup can art if you put it on a wall in a museum? These questions changed the direction of American art. Warhol almost certainly did not know the story behind the label. The red and white design was chosen in 1898 by Herberton Williams after a football game at Cornell. The medallion commemorated the bronze medal won at the 1900 Paris Exposition. Both details were more than 60 years old when Warhol painted them. The label had barely changed. It was already an artifact of American commercial history before it became an artifact of American art. Visitors to Warhol's grave do not leave flowers. They leave cans of soup, often tomato, a gesture that is tribute and joke and commentary at the same time. The can speaks for itself. Once the can became a symbol, the company could change without asking the family for permission. Chapter 13. 15 billion of soup and a new name. By the time the name changes, the invention is bigger than the inventor, and the family is bigger than the family story. In November 2024, the company changed its name. It was no longer the Campbell Soup Company. It was now the Campbell Company, a small adjustment that reflected a business that had expanded far beyond the product that built it. The company that John shaped around a single can of condensed soup now generated $9.6 billion in annual revenue and owned major brands across packaged food. It remained headquartered in Camden, New Jersey, in the same city where a 24-year-old chemist once set up a laboratory and offered to work for $7.50 per week. The red and white can was still on the shelf, but it was no longer the center of the business. The Dorrance family no longer held a majority of the shares. Decades of estate settlements, stock sales, and generational dilution reduced the combined family stake to roughly 33%. It was less than the 59% they controlled when Jack died in 1989. But through board positions and coordinated voting, the descendants of the inventor still exercised more influence over the company than any other group. By this time, there were roughly 87 living descendants of John Thompson Dorrance. They were scattered across 3 countries. Some had never met. A few had never visited headquarters. And yet, the instruction written into a 35-page will nearly a century earlier still echoed through boardroom votes and quarterly earnings calls. Do not sell. Do not lose control. Pass it forward. Ending. What one invention does to a bloodline. Now step back and look at the pattern. The grandfather changed an industry by removing water from soup. Then he tried to remove taxes from death by pretending he lived somewhere else. That lie doubled the bill. The son carried the fortune like a burden. He guarded it more than he enjoyed it. The grandchildren fractured. One left the country and signed away his citizenship. One stayed and built a second empire on horseback while holding the board seat. One became the quiet glue that kept the family stake from shattering into pieces. People love to say money buys freedom. This story is the opposite. This money came with rules, with court cases, with a will that reached forward through time like a hand closing around the throats of descendants not yet born. So here is the question I want to leave you with. If you inherit a fortune that demands loyalty, what do you owe it? Do you owe the past your obedience, or do you owe the future your courage? Because the can still sits on the shelf, red on top, white on the bottom, the metal still printed on the label, the design still familiar, and the only real mystery left is whether this family can hold together as long as the can has. 3 generations tried. A 4th is now in position. The will says hold. The instinct says protect it at all costs. Whether those 2 impulses can coexist for another generation is the question that never goes away. Pause for a second and imagine what it feels like to be born into a story you did not write. Your last name opens doors, but it also closes choices. Every decision is judged against a ghost, a man you never met, a will you never signed. Money can look like freedom from the outside. In this family, it often looked like instructions, lawyers, and fear. Fear of being the one who breaks the chain, and fear of being the one who loses control. And that is the real mystery the can leaves behind. Not what it earned, but what it demanded from the people who held it.